I'm Larry Mendte. This week on Jersey Matters, we are inside a laboratory at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital because Rutgers will be front and center in coronavirus research. Also in this week's show, we'll check with food banks in the area to find how the most vulnerable are dealing with the coronavirus. How is Atlantic City dealing with the fact that the casinos are now closed? We'll have a report. And it's not just toilet paper and Lysol that's sold out. Gun dealers are having a difficult time keeping their products on the shelves. And now our interview with Dr. Reynold Panettieri, Vice Chancellor of Translational Medicine and Science at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital at Rutgers University. Sir, thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it. I imagine you're extremely busy these days. I want to start with some of the basics about coronavirus, because I believe there's a lot of misinformation. As much information as there is, there's a lot of misinformation. What are the symptoms of it? How do people know that they don't have the flu, for instance?
So first, Larry, thank you so much for having me on the show. So coronavirus is a part of a family of viruses called SARS, and we're familiar with that with epidemics previously. But this particular virus attacks the respiratory system. Now, the respiratory system starts at your nose and goes all the way down to the alveoli, the gas exchanging units of the lung. So the common effects of a virus like corona is that it's going to cause nasal stuffiness, head cold kind of symptoms with cough. But then if it progresses, you start to get shortness of breath. That can take 1, 2, or maybe 3 days. The first symptoms are going to be what you experience with a typical virus. You're going to have muscle aches, you're going to have joint aches, then nasal stuffiness, a cough that doesn't clear. And if progressed, it goes to shortness of breath.
And for some reason, it affects parts of the population more than other parts of the population. We've all heard about the elderly. What about smokers?
Well, you know, we don't know about smokers, but what's the important takeaway here? The important takeaway is if you have comorbid disease, so that is multiple diseases, you're more likely to have more severe disease. What we find fascinating is that children are spared. There's lots of hypotheses or best guess why that's the case, some of which is that children get a lot of viruses. So a lot of viruses causes antibodies that prevents them from getting ill. But as you get older, you get fewer viruses. So that means we don't have the immunity against such viruses. And maybe that is why coronavirus targets the adults and those who have multiple medical conditions. Of course, if you have multiple medical conditions and you start to get a respiratory problem, it's going to be amplified. If you have high blood pressure, congestive heart failure, or other illness.
One of the big problems, it seems like, is that most people that get it either have no or mild symptoms and don't even know they have it. Why is that such a big problem?
Well, that's a huge problem, right, Larry? So if I'm not affected, if I don't think I'm sick or I'm just run down, I don't sequester myself. I don't self-quarantine. I don't realize I'm ill, but I'm shedding virus. So I become a reservoir spreading the virus to others who could become affected because they have comorbidity. So it's really important at the first hint that I have a cold that isn't going away, that maybe in this time and age, we should be aware that I could be infected with COVID-19.
If you get it, can you get it again?
A really interesting study that was just done abroad where they infected rhesus monkeys, and what they found is those monkeys that got infected and survived could not get the virus again. Now, this is in a non-primate, and it's very exciting because it would suggest that an immunity develops after you get the infection. Now, unfortunately, viruses are smart and they mutate. So in this season, in this time, you could be immune. Doesn't mean you may be immune come the fall or the winter when viruses are most prevalent.
You hear these people talk about a hope that once it gets warmer, this virus becomes dormant. Is there any evidence of that could happen?
Well, we do know that viruses are less evident in causing human diseases as we get outside into warm weather. Now, some of that may not be that the warm weather is killing the virus, except that people are more outside. So you're doing social distancing because you're outside. We're not breathing the air. That's the consequence of being locked in the wintertime. So one of the concepts is we have better hygiene in that we're out and about because the weather's nice. Everybody wants to go outside. Now, there could be some rationale that viruses don't survive in a warmer temperature, but we don't quite know the precise reason why it becomes less evident. We're certainly hoping, and we're hoping that as we get warmer, which we've had, that this will die down, especially if we do social distancing, preventing a host. Viruses need hosts. If we distance ourselves and we don't become a host, the virus will extinguish.
You have groups to study in China, in Italy, and around the world. So it's not like this took us by surprise. We were able to look back and say, here's what happened there. What are some of the some of the things we've learned from where it's been?
Well, we have learned that this virus is incredibly contagious. So if we look at Italy and you look at the time frame for which we are seeing some cases, but then this explosion of cases is what we call the exponential curve of infectivity from virus. That means 2 people get infected, but those 2 lead to 4, those 4 lead to 16, those 16 then continue to multiply very quickly until you're in tens of thousands. If we look at what happened in Italy and Spain now, what we're seeing is probably the future of what we can expect in the next 6 weeks, where there's going to be an explosion of illness because there are more people who are ill who have the potential to spread it. That's why the social distancing, these regulations are so incredibly important to adhere to.
Can we expect that with all that's being done? Is it still going to happen with people being quarantined and businesses being shut down?
Well, we're really hoping that we're taking the initiative a little earlier where France and Spain hadn't done. Once the horse is out of the barn, it is hard to contain. It's here, it's now. Now, I think everything that we're doing is correct. We are quarantining, self-quarantining, we're shutting down exposure, reservoirs. This is really important. If the people aren't together sharing the virus, then it will hopefully die off. But I think most healthcare professionals right now are preparing for the worst.
With hospital beds as well. That's the big problem. I heard that if they don't flatten the curve, they're concerned that the healthcare system just becomes overwhelmed. Are you seeing that already?
Well, we're seeing that certainly in Italy, and we're seeing that in Spain. So right now, their hospital beds are all consumed. I mean, there is nowhere else. In France, for example, there has been evidence to suggest ventilators are no longer available. So people who are most affected can't get put on a ventilator or life support. So, you know, the question of are we going to outstrip our capabilities is real.
I keep hearing, and you even alluded to it a little bit, about what could happen and how bad this could get. I read in the New York Times today that they were saying, depending on how many people get this, it could be anywhere from 200,000 deaths up to 600,000 plus deaths. So with all that's being done, you're still talking about hundreds of thousands?
Well, you know, Larry, you got to prepare. You got to prepare for the very, very worst. Now, we know, you know, the Spanish flu in the turn of the century and the 20th century was devastating. We looked at the numbers of deaths there. You got to realize the numbers of deaths we're talking about is far greater than that you saw with the bubonic plague. So, you know, the potential is there. I think we're doing everything right. I wish I had a crystal ball and said, you know, this is all going to go away before Memorial Day.
But that was the best case scenario in the paper. Best case scenario was 200,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you agree with that?
I think it's very plausible that could happen.
So that's frightening. Is there anything we're not doing?
Well, no. I think, you know what? I think right now we're doing everything that we can possibly do. What we've done is mobilized a lot of resources to put in the hands of scientists the capability and the possibility of cures or the possibility to diminish the consequences of coronavirus. You got to realize that once coronavirus causes acute respiratory distress syndrome, that is a 30% likelihood for death just from that syndrome, regardless if it was coronavirus.
In almost every case, and I know the acronym for it is ARDS, right?
Right.
And if someone gets ARDS, then they're intensive care, then there's the people that have died of ARDS.
Almost exclusively, correct. Yeah, and that, even if you develop ARDS, your likelihood of dying is 30%. And ARDS can be caused by many things: sepsis, it can be caused by significant blood loss, or viruses. When we're talking the best case scenario is only 2/3 of people will survive that syndrome by itself, regardless of the coronavirus.
I want to talk more about this, specifically New Jersey and especially Rutgers University, because I know that you're going to be involved in this. I want to find out exactly how much you're going to be involved, what you're going to do, and how much of your time does this take up now? Is it taking up most doctors' times? Let's talk about that when we come back, when we continue our conversation with Dr. Reynold Panettieri, Vice Chancellor at Rutgers University. Coming up, the Atlantic City casinos are shut down. How is that affecting the city and its workers? We'll check in on them when Jersey Matters comes right back.